Gintam?
Aho. Bonjour, Ozaawaa Giizhigo Ginew Dashkan Ziibiins Dunchba Mashikendo Dem Anishinaabemowin Monty McGahey the Shaganashi Winakazia Chippewa the Thames and the Bendagos. So we're parents of who are trying to speak the language at home. I guess, well, not just at home, but using the language with their children. We have a daughter who's 4, Zadai, and then we have a son who's 2, AAG. So yeah, we'll share a little bit about that.
Miigwech?
Nin Ziibiins and Mackinac Nino Dim, guy Alexandra Johnson in Ginew in Jaganashi Winakaz. It would day Miss Squaggy me was a guy getting Winjabawa didn't way Maganuk. A guy Nongom onigami sing in Diane in Danoki guy. It would day onigami sing. Niji Kingdom. Omaja Yayang, a guy Jawabam Magua Nija Anishinaabe Ginew Maganag Mashpuga what to call Ozaawaa Giizhigo Ginew. Anin. Yeah. We're gonna jail.
Okay, so our panel today is focused around the question, why should we speak Anishinaabemowin to the babies and children in our lives? I think we all know the obvious answer, right? We want them to speak Anishinaabemowin, so we should speak Anishinaabemowin to them. But there's a lot more to it, as we heard with Rochelle and Norman and Kay, and I'm sure we'll hear from Ozaawaa and Makoons, as well as Ziibiins. So our first question, what motivated you to begin speaking Anishinaabemowin to the babies and children in your life? And maybe I'll let Makoons start.
How? Nitaminwa. Jaganashi, Ndo Jaganashi mo. Like I grew up in Nova Scotia. My parents, my father was disconnected kind of from his community. Both of his parents were speakers, but he did not pass the language on, nor does he really understand it. So it wasn't until I was in my early adult life that I kind of like found a hole in myself and was wondering what I was trying to find. What brought me back home was my roots and wanting to like learn about that part of myself, since I had grown up my whole life with just in Jaganash influence, but knowing like in myself, I had always desired that, but didn't think it was accessible for me. So as I began like my bare paws digging through those roots of our family tree, I realized that to be the most authentic Anishinaabe Kwe that I could be was to learn my language so that I could speak with the same sound that all of my ancestors can understand from thousands and thousands of bloodlines and years back. So that's what brought me to the place where I decided that I knew that when I raised my children, that was going to be their first language, and the only way to do that was to begin learning it myself. So I started from scratch and walked into a program and couldn't say Anin or Miigwech or Bojo, and it's a learning process every day. So meet you.
For me, I guess it was instilled by my dad, who kind of wanted me to learn the language, and I grew up on Chippewa the Thames Reserve, which is near London, Ontario. In our community, we don't have any speakers. We haven't had speakers in our community maybe since the 1970s. So it wasn't a connection for me when I was younger to be connected to the language. I never heard it anywhere else except at school for our Ojibwe language class. So when I started learning as an adult, I learned about, I started learning more about our history and how our language was taken, and how it was kind of forcefully taken, I guess. So I felt like if there's, we didn't really choose to not speak our language anymore. So I felt like it was a choice for me to be able to try and bring it back. And I knew that speaking to my kids would help make that happen. And when I first started learning, I kind of had that in the back of my mind because I didn't have kids at the time, but I kind of had that as I was kind of learning the language, that was my main goal, was to pass it on to my children.
For me, I had a similar background where growing up, my grandma spoke a little, but not a lot. And I had one aunt who spoke a little bit of Anishinaabemowin and, would teach me a few words when I was a kid. But it wasn't until I was a young adult at 18 and started really investing and learning language. And at that time, I kept thinking, okay, I'm learning this for me, and I'm learning this, to be able to speak to my kids someday. I'm still not a parent. However, my as I've had friends start to have children, my first, I guess, good friends who had children were Mashkuga and Ozaawaa, and with their first baby, who, she's 4 now, right after they had their daughter, there was a group of us who went and visited, and it was not even really a question, I think, because, our relationship was formed around language learning. We all went to adult language camp together. And so our relationship was built on language. And so when they brought their first baby into this world, that was kind of like maybe a bond or a way that we all got to bring for this new baby, was speaking together and building our relationships and starting that, fully in Anishinaabemowin.
Which, so our next question, what has been your biggest obstacle so far in speaking Anishinaabemowin to these babies and children? And if you've managed to overcome it, tell us how you did it.
I guess they're still there every day. We hear language every day, and I mean, we hear English every day, but like our families don't speak the language. They all speak English, so we have to think about that and how we want their relationships with, their grandparents, their cousins, and how they have to know English because everyone else speaks it. So that's an obstacle that we're still navigating. And it's like when we go to family gatherings or go visit, we're still in the language. I haven't spoken English to them yet. So we stay in the language, and just trying to provide as much language, like having the YouTube videos that are only in the language and other things like that. And so just try and also, like, reinforcing the language can sometimes be a challenge because you don't want to reinforce it in a negative way, I guess. Like you don't want it to be like, speak Anishinaabemowin, like, so navigating around that and how to like just stay in the language and be kind about it and try not to make it into something that they have to do. And our daughter's getting older and she speaks a lot of English, but she understands a lot of the language, and she's becoming more aware that because I think as kids, they're not aware, they just switch back and forth. But she's becoming more aware of it, and sometimes she'll say, "Oh, I don't know the language," and then I'll just respond to her in Anishinaabemowin, and I'll be like arguing with her as I'm speaking Anishinaabemowin, and she fully understands what I'm saying. I'll be like, "Yeah, don't sustain Anishinaabemowin, don't Anishinaabemowin
Mishka Nongwa.
like you're speaking right now. I'm only talking to you in the language." And, so yeah, it's those are some of the barriers or some of the challenges. The other things are like, I know, like everyone knows, like the resources that are out there, and on Disney Channel you can change it to 10 different languages. You can change the movie into Spanish speaking, but there's no like Ojibwe option. So things like that, like we have, as much as we can, we've put a lot of like the YouTube videos or other things that are in the language. And so she's 4 now, and there's a lot of the things she's just kind of like, okay, I saw this like 1,000 times. I want to watch something else. So yeah, we've both we've let her watch things like in English, and then we've also sometimes just put it in another language like French, or just so she's not hearing that. Yeah. Is there anything?
Yeah, not to take up too much time, but I'll be like quite honest about being a person, like being a mother, being a person right now through a pandemic, and how that has changed our lives so drastically for the language learning community. Being a mom is really, or being a parent is tough in these times. And there came like a time in the pandemic where my brain just kind of split in half, and I was like, I'm so like exhausted. I've had no support around me to help gift, what a community would help to raise a child, to help relieve some of that off of my plate. And we were a completely Anishinaabe at household, and Zoom started happening a lot more, and the English came into the house that never used to come into the house. So then we had to begin navigating bilingualism because it was a monolingual household. And that really, really kind of tampered with my system that I had created to keep like such a strong willpower to stay in the language, even if I didn't know. And I had to learn what was the difference between learning Anishinaabemowin and what was being bilingual. And sometimes I would forget which language I was speaking in when we're at the table or whatever. And some days I would get really tired and I caved into speaking English. And I noticed that was completely dependent on my mental health that day. And that when my brain kind of was like, no, this is it. This is for survival purposes. You have only access to your English side right now. So it's been about like a year battle for me to get back the same passion and endurance and stamina and strength to be Anishinaabemowin at a household, and the easy, like the more I've caved into saying something in English to get the communication or the situation dealt with like quickly rather than to lose it because I can't find the word, the easier it began to say like, oh, I'm just gonna like cave to English. And so the fight to come back to this place where I'm only speaking the language was so much harder after it had gotten like easy to like go into that place. So I like had a really big struggle because my whole purpose that was driven by Anishinaabemowin, and that was my passion. And times got really dark for me, and I kind of lost that, and I had to really do so much work to go back to a place where like learning language, why it's special to me and why it's so healing to me and how I connect with that. Because I have to start with a place of love rather than I'm doing this because I want to teach it and I got to teach it and it's got to be, like I gotta teach all these things and we got to do it. It had to go back to a place that was like from our heart, from our spirit, where it's like, okay, remember the reason that you're doing this and remember how that feels, and like let's get back to that good place. So long answer for like, that was a really big struggle, and it's something that I have to really try hard at every single day, and I have to wake up with like a fresh clean slate so that I don't let those thoughts that are like easy to sink into like eat me again. So yeah, me you.
English. Ziibiins. English.
Yeah, so miigwech for sharing your guys' experience. I really appreciate hearing about that. I think what I failed to mention in my introduction was, so at the moment I've been working with Ojibwe Motarida Omaagedikiminang's Language Nest program. So I saw one of our little Labanujiag on the screen. I saw Divishkuvene Sikwe on there just a little bit ago. And so working with these young kids is, we've been meeting kind of in person mostly in the mornings during the week, and meeting with them in person and hearing, them. Some will talk a mix of, some are still kind of learning to talk, and some are speaking a mix of maybe mostly Ojibwe, or some are speaking a little bit of Ojibwe, a little bit of English. And so I think for me, kind of the working, especially with these really young kids, kind of where they're not maybe aware that they're speaking two different languages, right? Is to just constantly be trying to reaffirm without, so for example, one of the kids who she's about 3, she'll repeat after I start saying things multiple times. So, if we're out playing, she might say like slide down or something. And then if I'm like, oh, wakening, wakening, and trying to say some things, and then she'll start repeating over and over again, which I think for me has been important, not to necessarily be like, oh, you should say this to them, but more just being like, oh, is this what I should do? Is this what you're asking me to do? Trying to reinforce just those words. And then a big part too, I think, kind of one of the harder parts, but one of the commitments that personally I've tried to make for these young kids is to try and use Anishinaabemowin anytime I see them, so maybe we're out at the grocery store, and if I see one of the kids, just making sure I'm automatically trying to switch myself so that they don't hear me speak English, and trying to just reaffirm that of like, yep, this person doesn't speak English, so they don't know that I can speak English as well. And that, so that's kind of been maybe one of the harder parts, is just to like constantly remember, or sometimes when I speak with second language learners, or some of our elder first speakers, I'll try and, maybe throw an English word in or something if there's something I'm trying to just communicate and I don't know the word for it. And so with these younger kids, one of the struggles is to try and like use no English words if I can. And sometimes I'll find myself accidentally slipping up. So it's just trying to kind of a commitment to myself, I guess, as well, being like, okay, if I'm committing these kids, I'm going to try and speak Anishinaabemowin to them the entire time. So, yeah.
Next question. What has been the most rewarding part of your experience thus far? What moment did you really feel it?
Do you want me to start again, or Ziibiins, do you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, I could start. For me, I think one of the kind of most rewarding things working with these young kids as they're starting to speak at this program I'm working for. The kids are in between kind of 1 to 3, 3.5, around that age range. And I think for me, it's just so rewarding to start to hear these kids respond, especially when they start to pick up names. So some of the younger kids, when they start to I think identify like who people are and start being able to name people and paying attention and creating that relationship, I think has been extremely rewarding. And to start to see too, I think as some of us who haven't had the opportunity to learn our languages as a child, and then being able to engage with these kids who probably aren't consciously thinking like, oh, I'm speaking Anishinaabemowin, I'm speaking this language that is a big part of me, a big part of my family and where I come from and my ancestors, and this language that I can use to relate to the spirits and the spirit world around us, and to see them just kind of going about in the language, joking around saying, oh, day, or just talking about everyday things as if like without maybe having to deal with that emotional baggage that I know some of us, as we kind of struggle through our language learning journey, as Mashkogabo is saying, like go up and down, where we're, sometimes feeling really good about how we're speaking, or maybe we're learning, and it's easy to get into these downward spirals about being like, I don't think I've learned anything, I'm not progressing, like I can't even remember these basic words that I know I knew. I know that's something that I've gone through, and then being able to just spend time with these kids who just love so openly, and then are also using Anishinaabemowin as their primary form of communication. And it just, I don't know, brings my heart like warmth. I think every day I get to just say, like, I hear a little bit like, Bonjour, Ziibiins, and I'm like, oh, it just makes me happy. So, yeah.
Great.
For me, like, I guess part of it is like I'm so focused on like making sure I'm speaking to her, or I'm saying my daughter because she's older, but I tend to forget to kind of celebrate those things that, when she speaks or replies in the language. I'm just kind of like, yeah, you should, like, that's what we're doing here. But I forget to step back and be like, well, actually no kids like around here are doing that, and also in like how many generations. So I forget to remember that. But there are times when, like, here and there, where I'm kind of like amazed that at what she's able to do. And one time that I can think of recently was we have these little hand drums for them, and we'll have our hand drums out and we'll just kind of drum along and sing some songs that we know. And then she ended up making up her own little song, like, and she used Anishinaabemowin. She was just saying like,
Wawash cash, wawash cash.
yeah, she was saying like Giizhigo, Makwa, and she was just drumming and just kind of made up her own tune. So that was like a time where I was just kind of like, I don't even know what the word is for that, like amazed, or I can't even put the word to what what it felt like, because it wasn't something that we taught, like we wanted to teach her. Like we weren't like, one of our goals is for her to make up her own song or sing on her own. It just kind of happened. So yeah, that was one time.
For me, I'm going to try and keep it short because I have like a couple. So I try and take her to, or bring her. I want to first say our son is not really verbal yet. Like he's just beginning to talk here and there. So I don't want you to think that we're excluding him, but he understands everything more than we forget how much he understands in the language. And but he's only used a couple of words. His first word was naba. Everybody's sleeping all the time, like, oh, naba. So we're mainly focusing on our eldest, our daughter. So I've been taking her to online classes here and there now that I've kind of put myself back into those spaces. And like the other day, the speaker was asking for the class to translate the verbs or the commands, the imperatives. And she was saying words, and there was a word that I didn't know. I think it was like, it was a feeling word, like frustrated or excited or something sad. And so she's beside me and she's like, when you're upset. And I'm like, oh, I guess it kind of sounds like a similar word. I'm like, yeah, like kind of just like, good job for trying or whatever. And then the speaker was just like, yeah, when you're crying and you're really upset. And I was like, oh my God, she totally knew that word that I didn't know. How did she know that? Like, who taught her that? And it was like, okay, here's this moment where she's picked up something from someone else that we've had no childcare for 2 years, like since the pandemic started. She's been in school for 2 months and that's been it. And she's been at home since. So for both children, we've had them since this pandemic started, only had 2 months of childcare for the entire time. So I'm not expecting her to have picked up from anyone else because we've been her main source of, other than obviously recordings and resources that we're super thankful that are out there, face-to-face encounters or whatnot, so I'm not really sure, like she must have heard her father or a story or something and picked it up where I hadn't enforced it. And that was like very, like, it dawned on me. I was like, wow, she's picked up something that I haven't even enforced. So that was like a really rewarding moment. Another one would be like when she speaks a lot, like she speaks in English quite often. And we're trying to like navigate through like, how do we encourage her to feel like she knows as much in Anishinaabe to feel comfortable to speak it. But when she uses her English words, it makes my heart like so happy because she's not using the correct English word. She's using like how she learned it in Anishinaabe first. So like yesterday she was trying to like, I don't know, she'll be like you songed it instead of sing it, or she's like, you're on pause, like instead of I freezed you, or like, so there'd be these English translations that I'm like, that's like how we would have expressed it in Anishinaabe first. And she's translating her English over, or there's just a whole bunch of little ones like that. Like she uses like slippery a lot for like ice and things like that that I've noticed. And like thirdly, the most rewarding thing is when we see our friends, and not so much family right now, but our friends using the language with them. Um, that is just like, that just makes me so emotional because it just makes me feel like we're actually cradled and supported, and that our children are as well. And that's something I don't think anyone has really expected. Well, for me, like I just didn't foresee that happening in my lifetime. And so now that it has come to light, and like when our friends came down, Ziibiins was there, and as soon as they walked through the door, like I hadn't even heard them speak English before. So we just like went right into the language. And I think Monty ordered a pizza and they were like, "That's what he sounds like in English." And it was just like, that's what his voice sounds like when he speaks English. Like we're all just like, yeah, that's what it sounds like, because we just never go there. And for us to be able to experience that type of love is just like, I don't have words for that either, and how that feels to have a child be supported by like such a powerful spiritual gift. So yeah, it was a long answer.
Language. Yeah, I have one more question, and that should take us to time. And I don't know if anybody else has questions. You could throw them in the chat as well. But I'll just skip to our last question. What advice do you have for anyone who is considering maybe speaking Anishinaabemowin Ando to their children, or to babies, or their nieces and nephews?
For me, I would just say to just use it every day and use what you know. And, there's going to be those ups and downs, but just keep going and keep using it, and just make it normalized. I've seen other people, I guess it depends on your parenting style, but some people would be like, what color is this? Msquande. What does that mean? It means red. So they're kind of like, they're validating their Anishinaabemowin with the English. But I would say just use the Anishinaabemowin, like, because that's how we speak, or that's how we teach English, I guess, right? When we're talking to our children, like, I don't say, this is red, that's rouge. Like, I don't use another language to reinforce it. So just things like that, like objects, because nouns are easy. Like, that's just what it is. Like, it's a table, it's a chair. Like, you don't have to change the word much. So those are things that it can easily be used like every day and right away. And then using how to use the action words, that's kind of takes a bit more practice, but just making it normalized that, like, like, it's not a, it's not a table, it's a dope one, right? Like, you're saying, yeah, that's a dope one. So things like that.
For me, it would be to not shy away from spaces that encourage learning. For that time that I was not feeling like I was doing a good enough job, or I don't have the actual language to teach it fluently, or I'm making too many mistakes, or I don't know as much as these people in these groups, it really hurt me to like be not confident enough to enter those spaces. And since I have re-put myself in those places and felt confident to be there, because my mission is to learn while I'm there, my like it's just been exponential in my confidence and my like permission to like, okay, you're gonna make mistakes, you're probably gonna make a fool out of yourself, but this is why we're gonna not fool out of yourself, but like put yourself out there to be vulnerable and learning in that way. There's been so many places that have nurtured immersion, where I've met so many of you people, you awesome people, that really role modeled that and showed us like, okay, it's okay to be human and to fall down. How do we like do that in language and normalize that? So that really hurt me to like step away from those spaces because I was like insecure. And I would just say, like, just go, just do you, and just be proud and be Anishinaabe.
Oh, I think for me, it's to definitely, tackle it in a small way, right? So if you're wanting to start, you don't necessarily have to like have everything or be able to know how to talk about everything. And to not let that, get you down if you're like, I don't know how to say every single thing that's in my house right now to be able to tell, my kid or my niece or my nephew about it. But I think for me, something that works well is like picking a space, right? So, and being like, okay, this is going to be the space that we're going to use for language. So maybe it's the dining room, right? And so you're like, okay, I'm going to start with learning how to talk about plates and silverware and food. Again, like, food are nouns, so they're a little bit easier to learn if you're like, all right, if we're having fish, we're having oga, the best kind of enough. And so just, kind of trying to pick out these certain spaces and then make it small so you don't have to, start large if you don't feel ready. Just find a spot and try and learn as much language as you can to be able to speak in this like language space. And then as you grow, you can, start taking it into more places. If you want to, maybe you learned food words, so then you can start looking at cooking words. So then maybe you have 2 spaces in your house that become your language spaces, and kind of work and grow from there. I know that helps me when I'm at home talking to myself, but or talking with kids. So
You're gonna start a war with that fish comment.
I know, right?
Oh God, it's the best.
Oh, if anybody has a question for anyone on the panel, you can go ahead and ask. You can unmute or you can throw it in the chat. I don't know if any of the three of you have anything else you'd like to add. Or if you have a program you need to plug.
Me, great, you guys. You guys are goals. I hope to, I'm not a mom yet, but I really, really do want to learn how to speak Anishinaabe to my babies. My plan is like once I'm carrying, I want to like start singing to them, and just speaking. And I think I also have to teach my partner in the process. He's from Manitou Rapids, Manitou Botegong, but he's not a first speaker either. His grandparents were, but there's that one skip of a generation. So yeah, I really love listening to you guys. You guys are super inspiring. Get the spanum in an I look up to y'all. Miigwech for sharing.
Miigwech for saying that. I mean, we do have a podcast, which I didn't want to share today, but we do like share a lot of day-to-day things that like people had questions for all the time. I can send the information to Nigani Week and she can share it on whatever platform. But we made that just because there's so many questions that we had, and we put it there so there was one stop shop to go for all, so we wouldn't have to say the same thing over and over and over again. I would just like, I guess my advice is just to normalize it in the home, and like Ziibiins said, to like start somewhere and just make sure like that's where you keep consistent like words, and as soon as you bank those words and they become like memorized, then you can add in more vocabulary later and begin to like build your word bank and build your verb bank at home. And so, yeah, I still have a large learning journey to go. It never ends. It's a daily process to keep going. But like we get up and it's biskonye nongwa weganeshko wa biskonye and maba bibukoyan ha weganeshe nandegen, like, it's like every little thing. And So we've just found like when we add ceremony and prayer, which has been a more ritualistic thing we've been doing lately, that it just like supports our children's reason to why we're doing it, because it became such a normalized thing that when we do prayer at home, my daughter has so many questions and it really like enforces and grounds her. So I just wanted to add that, yeah, adding that special part into it has really helped everybody feel more grounded. So I don't know, I'm rambling now. Go.
I wanted to say miigwech for sharing with us today two sides, language learning journey and parenting, both, very involved things. And so like struggling as a parent through a pandemic, losing your community, like I appreciate all those shares because I think as other parents can relate that, today's world is a little different, and giving ourselves space to kind of heal and acknowledging that we want to get back to where it feels good. So I appreciate you sharing that with me as a mother. Kind of letting things fall to the wayside, and then trying to get back to some sort of normalcy. It's either pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, but I appreciate your time and being vulnerable with us on your journey as a language learner and as a parent, and for you, Ziibiins, talking with us about how encouraging little ones, because sometimes they get defiant or like, they want to do the opposite. And I feel the same way. Like I just, for some reason, get into this mood, and a good way is kind of playing with them. So what am I supposed to be doing? And I appreciate that. Miigwech.
Yeah, miigwech. I was gonna say something I was thinking about too. Whether for those of us, well, for those of us on here who have kids now, and those of us who are also like wanting to have kids in the future, I feel pretty inspired by how many people came to this gathering today, and just thinking about, there are a lot of us out there, and trying to make those connections as we go forward, because I think that's really how we are going to be able to support each other and support our communities and our families as we go forward and raising children, is to be able to make these connections. And whether it's maybe, have Zoom online gatherings with kids and friends, just to be able to, especially, I know I kind of feel like my role sometimes I'm like, is just to provide a little relief for parents too, just to be like, hey, like here's another person who can talk at your kid for a little bit, right? And so trying to build these relationships so that as we go forward, we're all going to be supporting each other and supporting these little ones as they grow up. So basically just that we should all connect and stay connected as we go forward.
Miigwech. Miigwech for talking this afternoon. Really appreciate you guys coming out, and I'm really grateful for your friendship.